You have so much power inside you. You are a god. Okay, we're all gods. We just get talked out of it. All the magic gets sucked out of our existence. And we forget that we are very powerful people. It only takes one little connection of being together with nature and seeing the cause and effect to really get people connected and mindful. And that's how you change the world. The Egyptians said this very well. When you incarnate, you're going into a spiritual death. Okay, you've forgotten where you've come from, and then you spend the rest of your waking life watching podcasts or reading books or going to lectures to find out what the hell you came here to do. Be careful what you ask for, because you might get it. Cataclysms and portals and temples actually go hand in hand together, because each time we think we're going to all be obliterated, there is the seed of a new civilization that starts again, and they precede every catastrophe. We owe the Anunnaki a moment of gratitude for what they did for us. And once in a while, they will pop in and look in and see how we're doing, by the way. This is what they don't talk about in YouTube and all these other researchers that make the Anunnaki look like bad people. No. They said, we've had 11 near extinction scenarios since 9,700 BC. And it usually comes in the form of, a solar outburst from the sun, where half the earth is baked. There was one in Australia, not in New Zealand, about 2500 BC, even set fire to the entire Chinese fleet. So that's well recorded. But technically, there's been three major events, and it's all to do with meteorites hitting the earth, forcing the earth upside down. And the Egyptians even described one event as actually hitting the earth so hard that the earth rotated backwards. And they said, of all the changes that take place, this is the most definitive one. And they said, we've been through this 4 times. Our culture is over 39,000 years old. Of course, none of the academics want to sort of talk about that because it's uncomfortable. But it's in the papyrus. It's on the walls. They said, we've been around longer than anybody else. We've recorded all these events, and you know what? We survived. And so each time we get hit by some meteorite or some flaming mountain that comes out of the sky, as the Aboriginal people call it, or the earth shaker, as they call it in North Queensland, things get a little bit squiffy. Tidal waves, the complete destruction of an ancient civilization, all the traces are completely effaced, and you have to kind of start again. But the funny thing is, if you listen to the ancient people and their stories, which their predecessors were closer to the events than we are. So why don't we listen to what they have to say? And this is why I like talking to people like the Aboriginal people or the Waitaha of New Zealand, who were in Easter Island 12,000 years ago when it was an archipelago. These are great stories because they said, these events are cyclical. They come around and luck favors the prepared. That's why we're obsessed with mapping the sky. All our monuments map the sky in huge amounts of time. And you think, well, that makes a lot of sense, because if I'm a farmer, I want to know how to plant crops. I can just put a bunch of sticks on my lawn and figure out where the sun and the solstices and the moon are going to be. And I can sow, I can reap, and then carry on again. I don't need to build a temple with 300-ton blocks of masonry to tell me what's happening in the sky and map out 144,000 years, because I'm not going to be around to talk about it. So that's where the temple building culture comes in. And that's where the portals also overlap. Because wherever you find a sacred site on the face of the earth, Uluru is a sacred site. It's a natural landscape temple, as we call it. So they didn't need to build anything. It's already there. It happens to occupy a geomagnetic and a gravitational hotspot. And that's what the Aboriginal people were picking up. It wasn't just the fact that it's a great big mountain in the middle of nowhere that sticks up like a sore thumb. It's the fact that it represents the primordial mound where the energy of the gods is, built. Every culture has that story. But it's the fact that they could sense this subtle energy, and we're made of the same stuff. So they'd probably walk there and they'd say, hey, I feel a little bit different here. I can actually feel the veil between worlds being very thin. So that's a natural landscape temple. The Egyptians and people like in England and Stonehenge, they would mark the same spots with these big stones because they figured, and I think they could project into the future, and they'd figured, you know what? In the 21st century, they're going to be really distracted with watches and smartphones and television and social media and all these other things and politics. And they won't know how to connect back with themselves and find the nature of their soul and their purpose in life. And in fact, they'll be disconnected from nature. They won't know the problems that are upon them. So we're going to take big stones and we're going to put them at these hotspots of energy, which they'll only find out about in the 21st century when they have all these gizmos to measure the energy, but we can sense it so we know where it is. So we're going to call them increase centers or places of the spirit or a place where there's a repository of the energy of the gods, depending on which culture you're in, so that when you lose track of where you are, you know where these portals are and you walk in, and under the certain conditions, you start feeling what I call, in very technical terms, the tingly wingly. And you start thinking that you are literally crossing into another level of reality. And you know what? You are, because we can now measure the energy, what it does, what the frequencies are, and the fact that they ally with your body and your brain waves that allow you to slip through into another level of reality and hopefully come back with information. And that's the whole point. So cataclysms and portals and temples actually go hand in hand together, because each time we think we're going to all be obliterated, there is the seed of a new civilization that starts again, and they precede every catastrophe. They really had their finger on the pulse of nature, and again, how to control it and how to leave something behind for us.
I do want to ask more about that, but let's start with portals because when we go to portals, it refers to the general conception of the word portal means from somewhere to somewhere else.
Yeah.
Can you help us break down the etymology and potentially what you mean like what you mean by portals and what is on the other side of the portal?
In Persia, they actually refer to it as a window into paradise. That's their version of portals. And essentially, it's a hotspot of electromagnetic energy, which is also a little gravitational hotspot, where the laws of physics, as we understand them, are a little bit different. And it's that sort of thinning of the difference between normal world and another world that allows that window of opportunity for you to step into a boundary, into another reality. So that's what it really comes down to. And in 2008, NASA actually discovered this for themselves. They're an interesting group of people. They actually show up at UFO conferences dressed in monks' cowls and rubber heads with lizards coming out of them. They're very funny. And they said, we love this ancient stuff because we actually practice this. It's like we can't talk about it, obviously, because we'd lose funding or people would laugh at us. But the fact is that we have some new toys. And one of the toys we had is a satellite, and it operates about 1,000 kilometers above the Earth's atmosphere. And one day we sort of realized that every 8 minutes, and I quote, magnetic portals come out of the Earth and they connect to the solar wind, creating these X points above the atmosphere. And those points go all the way to the sun and possibly beyond that. And I thought, finally, we've got the technology to figure out what the ancestors were talking when they said, when you go into this kiva in the middle of New Mexico, we have the reed of heaven that connects to the sky, to heaven, and the soul of the shaman goes through the reed, and the universe, wherever you want to call it, the creator, the management, comes through the reed into the sacred space. It's a two-way communication tool. So NASA was very excited about this, and then I pointed out, but you know what? The people of southern India, the Tamil, who's again another one of the oldest people on the planet, they had it figured out before 8,000 BC. They just used different language. And I said, this is what they wrote in the Yajurveda. Serpents that move along the ground, that are mirrored in the sky, that are the arrows of sorcerers. So the serpent basically is the common term for electromagnetism because it behaves like a serpent moving through the landscape. The sorcerer is someone who works with the source of things, the laws of nature themselves. And the arrow is where you use your intent, which is essentially an electromagnetic packet of information. And you direct that intent and you send the energy to where it needs to go. So they already had it all figured out without expensive multi-million dollar satellites. And watching the face of the color of the NASA people, became very pale. So I thought we were the first. Oh no, we've been there before. But it was a wonderful moment because it validated what all New Age people have been saying all along. That you can sense this stuff if you're open to it. But if you're a skeptic, obviously you need the science behind it, and now the science is there.
And so the ability to communicate with, well, at least the sun, but is because in ancient cultures, the shining, you have an interesting take on gods as well. Um, can you describe your maybe describe what you refer to as gods, and then
Oh,
maybe
easy.
who are we communicating to? Yeah.
It's more like a natural reference library. Plato actually nailed it perfectly in Greece. He said, it's we call it the other world or the umdwat, and there's no other place in the universe where you can find truth and real knowledge. That's where it exists. So they used to undertake an out-of-body experience where they took a poison and they had a near-death experience in order to leave the body, disappear into the other world for 3 days, and come back full of information. Leonardo da Vinci did it as well. Isaac Newton alluded to the fact that he also did the same thing. So it's the same thing. This time you're using your temple as a portal to leave to go somewhere else. In terms of gods, I mean, you can connect with anything or anyone on the other side because time dilates. The universe as you know it really is very different to anything you've experienced. I mean, some people take drugs and ayahuasca to imitate the effect, but that's not the real effect. It's an approximation of the effect. A god in the old days to the ancient people was essentially the spirit that's found in nature. So a glass of water has a god, a plant has a god. I'm not going to say a cell phone has a god. I don't think it has. But air has a god. A beach has a god. Everything is surrounded by the spirit of the entity that forms in the physical world. So if you and I, for example, want to understand water in all of its methods, from cold to boiling and everything in between, we're going to study water for years. And when you master every facet of water, you become as a god. That's what it meant. So it was applied to real people, and the physical people actually were gods. Now, in the old days, in the very, very remote times, they just happened to be a little bit different from us. They were about 8.5 feet tall. And again, this is how the ancient culture described these people. They're about 8.5 feet tall. They were described as human-like, but not quite human. And incredibly, they were actually light-skinned. This is the description that these people give us. They were light-skinned. So when you hear this in Polynesia, and in Australia, you go, Caucasians? No, way before Caucasians. This is where they came from. They were light skinned, red haired, or blonde with green eyes or blue eyes, and sometimes with elongated skulls, like the ones you see in South America. So, but the thing is, of all the research that I've done, I've not come across any idea that we as hunter gatherers at the time ever worshipped these people. There was no sense of superiority either. They just said, oh, they knew more than us. They knew about the laws of nature and how to manipulate them. And they were very interesting people. They're very knowledgeable. And they taught us a lot of things about civilization. There was a mutual respect. So today we got this sort of the whole woke movement, for example, about white supremacy and all of that. And if you mention this, they jump all over you. Well, that's the problem with today's society, is that you're linking Nazi sort of propaganda and the way they distorted the whole Aryan culture into something else. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a time when everybody got along. There was no sense of superiority, but there was one parallel culture here on Earth that ran concursively with humans, but they're already way ahead of us. The thing is that when we pick up the story about 11,000 years ago, before the end of the Ice Age, they're already on the way out because they've already been here for so many hundreds of thousands of years. And again, this comes from the actual mouth of the oldest people on the planet. So I like hearing what they have to say because it really gives us a bigger window into what was really happening on Earth.
I know this conversation started deep and it's only about to get even deeper. Freddy is a treasure trove of insight with all the research that he's put into it. Now, we have amazing guests like this coming on every week, actually twice a week. And everything you see is powered and empowered by your subscription. So please take a moment to hit subscribe to the channel. If you can subscribe to the channel, it powers everything we're trying to do, championing positivity around the world, creating these conscious conversations, inspiration for your evolution, completely happening thanks to you. It's your subscription that powers this channel. So if you can, please take a moment. There's subscribe somewhere down here. Hit the button. It really helps. And thank you so much, as always, for being so inspired to evolve. Back to the episode. Yeah, the culture's shifting and leaving and being present is a really interesting conversation, because I was, through one of your videos, contemplating the idea that, let's say something happened to the earth right now. Yeah, that eroded all of our electricity. Let's just say electricity's gone. The actual people that would be able to survive the best would be some of the most remote cultures, which we would
Yeah,
consider least civilized right now, but they would in fact end up most civilized if we just
exactly.
gave it 100 or 200 years. And that sort of brought into lens this, like, what happens in ancient times when we lose. So you look at like some of these real great monuments and places that you've studied, and you start to go, people may have come and gone, and then the most connected to nature of us potentially survived. But yeah, I can see you wanting to share, so I'll just leave it. Yeah, please.
I mean, it's all about the fact that you can't take the physical world with you when you die. So don't get too attached to it. By all means, enjoy it within reason. Leave something for somebody else. But there's no point being attached to material goods and riches and money and all of that, because you can't take it with you. And once you die, you're as rich as the moment you arrived on the planet Earth. And yeah, no, I do agree. I mean, for example, we have the technology of something called the neutron bomb. It basically knocks out. It doesn't kill people. It just knocks out everything that's electric. So all you need is some idiot to set off a neutron bomb somewhere on the planet, and everything within a 200-mile radius, maybe more. I'm not up on the technology. It's not one of my particular things. It basically knocks out anything that's electronic. Now, our biggest Achilles heel in the 21st century is that we've given our God given power to everything that is electronic. I mean, everybody relies on their cell phones. I thought I was the last person that had a landline because I refused to be dictated to by this little black rectangle until people were texting me on a landline. And I had to explain to them, you can't text a landline. Oh, forget it. I'll buy a phone. And even then, I'll only use it for making emergency phone calls or shooting video where I shouldn't be filming. But apart from that, it's the fact that we've become so connected to the electric world that if you want money, you have to go and withdraw money from a cash machine that requires electric connection. If you want to pay contactless, you have to pay at a bar or a coffee shop with something that's electric. Now that goes down, and we had it here where I live in the east coast of America. There's a hurricane that came through here. We lost power for 3 days. No one could function. I mean, no store knew how to take cash because not even the cash register could be opened. They had to break into their own cash register, and they didn't have a change to actually give you because there wasn't. Everyone wants to pay by credit card. So we set ourselves up for the first time in history, the biggest Achilles heel of the fall of civilization. But again, it goes down to the fact that yes, the more connected you are to nature, where to get fresh water, for example. Most people, I was talking to a couple of people who work for the Rockefeller Institute in New York, and this is one of the one good Rockefeller that I've heard of. He's actually a very benevolent guy who does a lot of philanthropic work, nothing like the other guys. So I liked him immediately. And he said, I run a farm with all the money that I've been given. I run a farm on the other side of New York, on the other side of the river, and it's an organic farm. And we have a restaurant there, which we cater to rich people to fund the farm. And what I do is every couple of weeks, I go into the Bronx or Queens, which kind of used to be and kind of still is a very dodgy part of New York, very inner city. A lot of children who obviously they're not going to make it past the age of 22. They're all part of gangs and things. It's a drug culture. They've lost hope. And they said, I take these people, put them on a bus, and bring them here to stay for a week. And all they want to do is go and kill somebody, or they just want to be the top of their gang. They don't even know where milk comes from. They think it comes from a carton. They don't understand that it comes from a cow. And after a week of being on the land, tending to vegetables and looking after animals, they want to be astronauts. They want to be teachers. They want to go and do and look at the world. They want to help others. And suddenly their whole demeanor changes. It only takes one little connection of being together with nature and seeing the cause and effect to really get people connected and mindful. And that's how you change the world. So you're absolutely right. If a meteorite was to hit right now, people in the Amazon would be the richest people on the planet because A, they can get water, they can trap fish, and they know which vegetables to eat, and they also know which trees to tap to get high. So that's a very, very good thing.
You were talking about the one good one, and that sort of triggered this thing in the back of my head, which is not related. So there's no perfect segue here. But the Book of Enoch, and you mentioned it was written by the one good Anunnaki, and so for me, still on this exploration of the Anunnaki and what is there, and maybe you can help illuminate what's in that space, who they are, what they do, where they come from, and potentially the Book of Enoch and the wisdom and insights there.
There's a lot of nonsense out there, and I blame YouTube for this. If it's free, you get what you pay for. That's my motto. Because
Be
I mean, I get
skeptical.
these
Yeah, be
emails every
skeptical.
single
Yeah.
week. What do you think of this thing on YouTube? Is it free? Yes. Well, you get what you pay for. There's so much nonsense out there, and good work takes time. Good research takes time. I mean, I wrote about this in The Missing Lands, my sixth book. I'm losing track of stuff. And it took me years to go through the old Book of Enoch in the Ethiopian tradition that was then translated into English. And even then, there's a few Christian overtones. So you have to get around that because you couldn't publish anything on the ancient past back in the Victorian era unless you gave it a certain biblical overtone. So once you understand that, you know what's going on. Now, the other thing you got to understand is that the information that we get from the Anunnaki is either comes from Zecharia Sitchin, who made up 80% of the material he ever wrote about. The other 20% is fantastic. But he did open us up to the fact that we're talking about, these gods from a long, long time ago. So credit where credit is due, but he did get a lot of it wrong. But that aside, you have to understand the political machinations that were going on at the time. So the Hebrews are in captivity in Babylon, and they're not allowed anywhere near the sacred text. They would stand outside the mosques and listen to what was being said. And they picked up bits and pieces of information, and they said, "Hey, we can actually build together a book that becomes the Bible." And the Bible, the Old Testament, makes no sense. Yeah, because they weren't getting the information, the full information of what was really going on. And then, to give themselves superiority over everybody in that region, they would change the names of people and locations, and that causes huge problems. So you have to go to the Babylonian version of the Anunnaki, but then you got to understand that they stole that information from the Sumerians. And then the Sumerians borrowed that from the Armenians. So by the time the Sumerians get the story of the Anunnaki, it's already 5,000 years old because the flood took place in 9,700 BC. So once you've got that down, now you're in good territory. Now we go over to the book of Emed Ur Anu. That's what became Enoch. So they changed the name of one of the Anu to Enoch. There's no such thing as Enoch; never existed. So Emed Ur Anu is a human being, or half human, half divine, who actually knew how to form letters. So he's allowed to go and hang out with the Anu, who are his own people anyway. And the descriptions are wonderful. And I think the best translation in English is from 1904, I believe. And I'm trying to remember the writer. A very, very good job. And he talks about how he was allowed to accompany the Anunnaki, which literally means the people of the sky god Anu. It's almost like a form of the worship of Ra in Egypt. Same thing. And these were much taller people, and they had very light skin. They had a real problem with sunlight. They had to keep smearing this oil on their skin, like we have suntan lotion. And I know in Australia you totally understand what I'm talking about. With the ozone layer being a little thin down there. And so you had to keep smearing this oil on their skin. It gave them a shining appearance. Oh, we'll nickname them the Shining Ones. But also because they had a much greater intellect than your average hunter-gatherer, there was a sort of a demeanor about them. When you're learned, you have a demeanor about you. It gives you a certain glow, and that's what also the Shining One means. So that was their nickname. And the idea was that they were great prognosticators and builders of monuments. They were great astronomers, seafarers, and they knew how to bend the laws of nature. And that's what Emet Ur-Anu was saying. And they said, one day, one of their leaders has this incredible dream, watches burning mountains coming out of the sky, hitting the earth, creating a terrible flood. So he panics. He gets together all the people and the savants into his room and says, "Listen, did I have a really bad nightmare, or is this true? Is the earth going to be hit?" So they started looking at the sky and the stars and where everything was, and they said, in 300 years' time, the earth is going to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and we are going to be wiped out. We got to do something about this. Oh, in the meantime, we have some bad news, even worse news than that. I said, "What's that?" There's a group of people called the Watchers, who are basically the intermediaries between the Anu and the human beings, who defied orders, and we don't know why they did this. A small group of them who defied orders, and they went down to the plains and they're mating with human women. They're teaching them how to make bows and arrows and kill each other and other things that undeveloped people shouldn't know at their level of civilization. They're destroying the human race. And here's the worst part, as if that wasn't bad news in itself. The children that were begot by the human women, and they died during childbirth because they gave birth to infants, they are these sort of giant infants covered with red hair. And they're running amok, and they're eating people for fun, and they kill people for fun, and they're breeding so fast that we're losing track of them. So the Lords of Vanu asked the other watchers, the ones that never get credit, go down to the plains, get rid of the children of the bastard watchers, and put them in jail. Put them in a boiling hot volcano, because humans are not going to stand a chance. And so they go away. And what became the archangels in our culture, Gabriel, Uriel, and Raphael, they come back to the Lords of Vanu and they said, we have not got the manpower to deal with this. They're running amok. They're breeding like crazy. The planet's going to be taken over by red-haired giants. And that's the moment when I'm reading this and I'm getting chills just thinking about it. You're a fly in the room looking at that moment where the Lords of Vanu, who are feeling really responsible for this, complete fuck up. It wasn't their fault. And they said, we're going to have to destroy the earth. I mean, we know there are objects coming this way, but we're going to use our intent, the power of our intent, to make sure the big rocks in this meteor shower will hit the earth in all the places where you don't want it to hit, which is the ocean. It's going to create huge tidal waves. So they generated the flood. It was already coming anyway, but they made sure that it was going to happen. But here's the good part of the story. And this is what they don't talk about in YouTube and all these other researchers that make the Anunnaki look like bad people. No, they said, many of us will not survive. Despite the fact that we are gods, a lot of us are also going to die. Some of us will escape. But we have to ask some volunteers to stay behind to help humans, the surviving humans, to get themselves back on their feet, because they're going to need a lot of help, and we owe them. So this is the moment where, acknowledged in history, that all around the world, around 8,500, 9,000 BC, humans spontaneously discovered civilization. Animal husbandry, agriculture, domesticating of crops, mathematics, astrology, and so forth. And they appear at different points around the world. And the thing that connects them, and the Aboriginal people have the same story, by the way, they said, yeah, these gods appear in groups of 7, led by a charismatic leader with these double-hull canoes, and they teach us the accoutrements of civilization. And then, when they realized that these groups of humans were doing okay, they went back into the ocean, and we never heard about them ever again. So we owe the Anunnaki a modicum of gratitude for what they did for us. And they, once in a while, they will pop in and look in and see how we're doing, by the way. So they haven't totally gone away.
Hi there, guys. I wanted to take a quick moment just to introduce you to my one-to-one coaching. It's something that I deeply love doing. As you can tell, conscious conversation is such a massive part of my life. And having one-to-one, deep, meaningful conversations with people where I get to show up as your brother or as the coach or as your mentor has been such a gift for me personally, and a gift for lots of the people that I have supported on the journey of living a more spiritually empowered, spiritually powered, spiritually aligned life. You don't have to take my word for it. Here's some examples of people all around the world that have experienced profound transformations through this coaching experience.
Amrit is a fantastic coach.
In a few sessions, he got to a depth that I'd only experienced before working with certain medicines.
He's gone through a lot of the struggles that you're probably facing, and Amrit's been a really strong, supportive figure in my journey.
In control of myself.
I'm kinder to myself.
I actually have that vision and a purpose.
I do feel like I'm a better version of myself already.
Amazing energy.
He was easy to talk to, which made me easy to trust him.
Working with Amrit at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and really I was bouncing out of bed.
Whenever I get off the calls with Amrit, best money we've ever spent.
I would not recommend him because I don't want everyone to know about him, and then I won't be able to book him. If he gets too busy, I won't get my turn.
I would say absolutely.
There's no way you can work with Amrit for a period of time without being transformed.
So if you're considering him as a coach, do not hesitate, because you won't be disappointed.
Alrighty, so hopefully that's inspiring your evolution onwards and upwards. And if you are so inspired to evolve, you can book in a one-to-one call with me directly at www.hebrides.com. amrit.coach/life. And guys, if I can say so myself, I do think this is something quite special. Most people that I see building things online don't really work with people this deeply, this intimately, one-on-one as things start to grow, just because it is so time intensive. And yet I'm so deeply passionate about the transformation that comes from one-to-one coaching that just isn't available anywhere else. It would be my absolute honor and a pleasure to support your spiritual awakening, your spiritual path, your spiritual unfoldment. It is my life's work. I look forward to seeing you in the call. Back to today's podcast. How do you think we're going right now? Are we on the precipice of another great challenge? Because I've also tuned into, there's many threads from where that question is coming from, and maybe I'll provide a couple. 2012 being a bit of a midway point, and the misunderstanding of the Mayan calendar there, I think, is really useful. And then also the other piece around, like it does seem like we are, I heard you say a similar cataclysmic event is potentially on its way, but for the first time ever, we may be able to deal with it in a different way. So those are a couple of there's more in there, but I'll just stop there and let you take over the question.
Wait, there's 4 questions.
Only? I thought there was more. You lost count. Should I ask again?
Actually, we've been in this problem. We are in this problem every November or every June as well. It's called the Taurid meteor shower. For 17 days, the Earth passes through this field of debris, which is the same field of debris that created the flood in the first place. In fact, it's the same debris that creates the problems of the last 11,000 years, where we had 11 near-extinction scenarios. I don't know if you recall, but back in 1902, I believe, there was a massive explosion over Siberia, knocked out hundreds of square miles. That was one small rock that actually got through the Earth's shield and did an aerial blast, and it took out a huge chunk of Siberia. So it's every single year we look up at the sky, we go out and have a Barbie, and they would say, "Oh, look at all of those spots of light coming through." Yeah, but the problem is that now NASA, with other toys that they have, they said, it's interesting that 11,000 years ago, they had the same problem that we're faced with now, because between 2032 and 2042, those big chunks that created the flood, they're coming back around again, and we've got them on our radar. That's why every other month there's a press release of NASA saying, how about we send a nuclear projectile out into space to blow up an asteroid, just in case one comes near the Earth? Or maybe we'll use a laser, or maybe we'll use a rocket. Have you noticed this, that they keep telling you? They're just preparing you for the fact of this inevitability. They're just paving the way to make you comfortable with the fact that we're in the middle of some really deep doo-doo. And the Maya were also talking about this, because they said, why people were obsessed with 2012. We just want to publicly laugh at that, because they didn't understand what we're talking about. 2012 is the midpoint in between two ages. We've reached the end of the fourth world. We're about to go to the fifth world, or the third world and the fourth world if you're in other cultures. And the thing is, you have a 30-year window either side. And not only is the Earth going to roll over and we're going to be, face a periodic catastrophe, but the more you're prepared for it, the more people will survive. That's what happens all the time. There will be some destruction, but to be prepared, luck favors the prepared. So you have a 60-year window of opportunity to get it right. And part of that window also involves consciousness, because you can't get away. Catastrophe and consciousness and changes of cycles are linked together. So the idea is to hit a critical mass before the window closes that allows us to shift our consciousness and say, hey, we can't keep going in the direction that we're going in. Every single form of government on the planet, and I can't find any democracy on the planet right now, as much as I love democracy, that actually is working that well. Gandhi actually said it very well when someone asked him, what do you think of democracy, Mr. Gandhi? And he said, I think it's a lovely idea. I can't wait for someone to try it. I miss him. He had the best quotes. So, and he was absolutely right. But we're looking at this sort of populist movement around the world, and what is even more disturbing is that because we're faced with so many problems, everybody's voting for right-wing governments. That's the last thing you want to do, because they're the worst people that usually create the problems to begin with, and then blame everybody else for it. And people are so enamored with social media and the propaganda in social media, they don't realize they've been had. So people are out there, like myself, I hope, trying to educate the public that, yeah, you need to get away from all of this trivial stuff and read good book that's been well researched, and take the politics out of it and take your own personal issues out of it. And the fact is that we are pretty close to hitting a critical mass where many people are actually saying, questioning their system of government, the way we're doing things, the way we use our money to influence the outcome of things, like being much more conscious in the way we buy things. So many young children have some great ideas about fixing pollution in the oceans, for example. So that they are there. It's just that and having been involved in media for 14 years myself, it's not a conspiracy. It's just that it sells newspapers to talk about negativity and fear because we're addicted to it. Let's face it. I mean, there was a newspaper in England that ran for 15 years talking about good news. They went out of business because everybody was bored. There was no conflict, you see. So the only other way to do it is to say, we're going to be wiped out. How are you going to deal with that? So when I was finishing the book, The Missing Lands, I had exactly the same question. We are in the middle of huge changes right now. The Tamil culture talked about the change of ages as well, the next Yuga cycle. So everybody talks about the age, and we're in it right now. So the idea is to try and be aware of what is going on, what you're in the middle of it, and make conscious choices to influence the world around you. Don't worry about the big picture, because if you haven't got any control of the big picture, there's no point worrying about it. Let someone else who is closer to the big picture, like politicians or whatever, to deal with that. Take in and deal with your own little garden. Okay, don't overstretch your boundaries. Take care of your immediate environment and be the change you wish to see. Another Gandhi quote, by the way. So the neighbor next to you will say, "Hey, that's a lovely garden. I think I'll do that." Great, you've just changed someone, and they're going to be part of that change. And the next guy next door will say, "I hate you. I'm going to set fire to your garden." And you protect your territory and you let them get on with their own little life. That's fine, because that's the way it is here on Earth. So things are improving. They're just very slow. And like all humans, we do take it right up to the last minute. But so I'm feeling quite comfortable that, and I think the fact that we are seeing a lot of chaos right now tells me that people like me are doing our job properly, because we're putting ideas based on ancient civilization that we have the tools around us to face this. This is nothing new that we're going through. We've been through this before. So we have the tools, and these tools that we're putting into the public domain are having an effect. And the people that are holding onto the old paradigm feel threatened by that, so they react. So if we're right now living in very quiet times, I would be concerned that I would not be doing my job properly, you see. That's how it happens. Sometimes you have to create a little bit of tension to force things to turn to another side. So I'm feeling pretty good about it. I hope it happens during my lifetime. I don't. I hate to think that I incarnated for no reason, but at the same time, there is something, and I don't want to give away the end of the last book because it was kind of prophetic. I wrote it on a beach in New Zealand. I had this suddenly aha. We do have. The technology to map the use of human consciousness and how it can actually alter, for example, the drum of a computerized beat. Okay, think about that. 23 people in a room looking at a computer were able to influence the outcome of the machine. So that's what I mean by intent being a little packet of electromagnetic energy. Correctly directed, you can alter things. That's what makes you a god. Now, think about what would happen if you suddenly wake up and the news says, hey, we just found a 5-mile wide asteroid and it's going to hit the Earth tomorrow. It only takes 1% of the population of the Earth, and this has been calculated, 1% of the population of the Earth to think about moving that object out of the way, and that's probably what will happen. So the irony is, 12,000 years ago, the Anunnaki were forcing this to happen to save us from these red-haired giants taking over the Earth, and now we're in the same predicament. And now, as the Hopi said, we're the gods we're waiting for. We have that technology, and we can use that. That would be so poetic. I don't want to get to that close. I have to say, I don't want to get to that point where it's that close. But there is an antidote to all of this.
Yeah, one of my questions was
Did I
going to
cover
be
all
around
4
it.
questions, by the way?
Oh, you more than covered all 4 questions, by the way. Thank you so much. I think you covered all 6. The yeah, the tools, because luck favors the prepared, and the intent. I think the structure of intent is really profound in your work, the way you're sharing it as well, and it would be very poetic. It'd be beyond poetic if that was. And one of the things that's present in that example is just the, like, 1% doesn't sound like much, but yet it would require some unification across borders for this planet, and just what that would require, for 1% to get on board together, which, like you said, there is a lot of chaos at the moment. But through the chaos, it's almost like, I almost picture like a sieve, and they're like mining for gold and everything's just getting shook up, and there's like all the dirt's just sort of falling through, but you can see it as it's falling through, so you can harvest the diamonds. And it really does feel like a very
Don't forget
interesting.
also that what you're seeing in terms of chaos is also depends on how much attention you're paying to whatever media you're watching. I mean, I take people on groups to sacred sites around the world. I get them to actually experience the portals, and these people 10 days later, they're not the same when they arrived. And I said, my point is, don't come here as tourists. If you're a tourist, you can go home now. Of course, I'm not giving you a refund, but go home. I don't do tourism. I want you to understand the meaning of sacred places. I want you to interact with these portals, and I want you to hear what's going on. And hopefully, if you leave 10 days later and you're a different person, I've done my job, because I want you to understand who you are, where you've come from, of what you come here to do. I want you to understand that you have so much power inside you. You are a god. Okay, we're all gods. We just get talked out of it by religion and God knows what else. Or our parents saying, "Stop talking to the fairies," but the fairies are right there. I can see them. So these things, all the magic gets sucked out of our existence, and we forget that we are very powerful people. So the idea of interacting with these places is to remind you of that power. And if you can get to that point, you can do extraordinary things. So the 1% really comes from those wonderful groups of people called the Buddhist monks, who went on these transcendental movements, excursions around America back in the 70s, and they said, we can fix the crime rate. Just give us, a couple of hours in a room in the middle of Washington in July, at the height of the crime rate, because it's very hot and sticky in July, so everybody goes nuts. And 26 monks sat in a room and they prayed and did what they did, which is to pray, bring a sense of peace around these troubled spots. And suddenly the crime rate collapses literally overnight. And they figured, oh, that was a coincidence. So they went to Chicago, and the same thing happened. And then they went to other troubled cities, and the same thing happened. So once they left, the crime went back up. But that was the point. If 26 people can have that effect on a city, then it only takes 1% to basically have that effect anywhere. And there's the irony. If we use that to basically move a large projectile that's about to hit the Earth and save the Earth, I bet you that will be the one thing that will galvanize the human race. And they'll say, wow, we actually work together. Of course, 1% did it, but we work together to create peace on Earth. Now, that would be fantastic, wouldn't it?
Oh, it'll be so sweet. And one of the things in there is almost like preceding intent is this concept of choice that I can also hear echoing in this conversation right now. And one of a dear friend of mine, she watches a show called Outlander. I think you might be familiar with it, where there's a bunch of people, they go and they touch Stonehenge and it turns into a little like they can literally get transported. Oh, I probably should say spoiler alert for those that don't watch. Sorry. Anyway, they go to Stonehenge, they touch it, and they get transported back in time.
Yeah.
And they're going to like all these, have all these interesting interactions. Anyway, my friend being my friend, she's really cool. She afterwards, sitting around with her girlfriends, has this conversation. And the question that emerged was, if you could go back at any point in time, where would you go to? And I was like, wow, now that's a question to ask, and most of, and my, like, they all had very interesting responses, but my friend's response in particular stood out to me, which was, I would come back to now. Like, what a point in history, what a point in time, like you mentioned earlier. We're at this real changing of the guard, shift in the winds sort of place to be, to sort of see how civilization makes it through. Like, you really get to see so much change in such
Yeah, and
a
think about it.
confined window of time.
The first time in history, as far as we know, that the most number of souls have incarnated at the same time. Something's obviously going on. It's like everyone's here
Mm.
for the finale. That's my impression
Mm.
anyway. But no, I think the analogy is very, very good. I mean, yeah, I mean, these places are places where you can actually project yourself into another level of reality, just not physically. Although, that said, I have spoken to several indigenous people in South America that do say there is a portal actually on Lake Titicaca, and I've been there. It's a very powerful place. And it's in the shape of a door in the shape of a T. It doesn't go anywhere. And the T shape is literally called the breath of God. It's the Tao. It's the same shape around the world. So whenever you see a doorway that goes nowhere in the shape of a T, that's a very important place to hang out. And the locals said, yeah, it's pretty dangerous because we see people coming in and out of it all the time dressed in strange period costume. So we give it, a little bit of space, and it makes you a little bit afraid, but there's nothing really afraid of. But when you see people coming in and out of the stone, it's a little bit disconcerting. And there was one guy who was actually there, a tourist, who actually got physically sucked into the portal. And apparently he showed up 2 days later, completely discombobulated. He said, I had no idea that was even possible. And he was talking gibberish. And people don't make that up because they just get laughed at. So there is some truth to Outlander, I have to say. And I did experience something very similar in the Great Pyramid when I was first learning all of this about 30 years ago, because I didn't think any of this was possible. I had a sense that it could be, but I didn't know how. I didn't have the teachers to show me the way. And it was, I remember it exactly as if it was yesterday. And I had a very good teacher, an incredible psychic who works for the British police, by the way, to solve their crimes. Of course, they don't want to talk about her because they don't want people to think they're using a psychic to figure out that the guy over there in the white van is the murderer. Turns out he was. So she's very good, and she's a great friend of mine. And she takes us to all of these portals around the world to experience and understand the context before we start learning about it intellectually. Okay, you can do it intellectually, but you're missing the best in thing, which is the physical connection. So we're in the Great Pyramid, and there was a day when we couldn't get private access, which means you have to share the building with tourists running up and down the building. And if you've been there, it's loud. The whole place is it's a beautifully, finely tuned building. You drop a pin and it hurts your ears. So you got to be very gentle in there. And so we went upstairs to the King's Chamber. And part of what we do as a group is we conduct spiritual terrorism. We fix the problems that people leave behind at sacred space because the type of rock that they use has a lot of quartz and it's piezoelectric, which means if you take your intent in there, the rock remembers everything. So if you take in your nonsense and your problems, the rock says, okay. And we have to go there and clean it up and put it back to what it used to be. And there's lots of groups doing this around the world. So we went in there and it felt kind of weird. And I thought, okay, I'm there with three other people. And I said, oh, wait a minute, everybody's left the room. Where's all the tourists gone? And literally, they vanished out of the building, and suddenly the lights go off. So we're in the King's Chamber. It's pitch black. There's 4 guys in the room, and someone was saying, well, why don't you do a tone in the building, which is you pick up the note in the specific room in which you carry the intent into the actual stone. It's a very old technique, and it's very, very useful. So there's sounds coming out of us that I've never been able to do before or since. And as clearly as I'm looking at you now, all of these people came out of the stone, surrounded us. They're about 8.5 feet tall, dressed in these beautiful white gowns. And it was a wonderful moment where I didn't panic. I just thought, I'm with my family. I feel so good about this. And they lowered their heads and I lowered mine. Again, we're in total darkness. And I thought, I got so many questions to ask. And suddenly, boom, the lights go off and we can see each other. And 4 guys are in shock. I mean, we are completely in shock. Something's happened. But, being guys, nobody wants to say anything. So once you got out of the building, I said, all right, I'm going to be the girly man. Did anybody see what I saw up there? And the other guy says, oh, the people. We did a toning, and these people came out of the stones. And the next guy says, yeah, they're very tall, dressed in these white gowns. And I said, okay, so we all saw this. I said, yes. And then we went back into shock. And we met up with our fearless, glorious leader, the psychic, who didn't actually manage to get in. And she looked at us, and we didn't say a word. And she said, well, we're tuning into the building and we're finding out the history of the building. And there's chambers in there that nobody knows about. And then we tune into what you guys were up to see if you were behaving. And well, look at what happened. You did what you're supposed to do. You honor the building. You took the intention there of cleaning the building and assisting the original architects. And did you enjoy meeting the guardians of the building that came out of the stones? And I said, that really happened. And she says, of course it happened. Why do you think we're doing this? And that's when I quit my day job with a big fat paycheck. And I said, this is what I want to do. People need to know that these places are alive. And I call them the self-help centers. So when you forget that magic exists and it's possible to connect with another level of reality and help yourself in this lifetime, that's where you want to go. So yeah, this is a very important part of our matrix to connect with these hotspots.
Alrighty, question time. So, intent. How are you taking away and carrying the insights around intent in your life from this conversation? How is your life going to be different now that you have this awareness around intent? Perhaps you already have an awareness around intention, and this is just driving the point home deeper. I'd love to hear from you about intention in the comments below. Back to the episode. I was going to ask you one of the high level questions would be, what is one of the most intriguing sacred sites you have visited? Because you've been to so many of them, and what in particular made that stand out? Yeah.
Oh, there's been so many. It really depends what I'm looking for. I mean, my job is to become a better teacher. That's all I care about. Not to mix stuff up and get my ego out of the equation. I want to be able to tell people and give them something that really is meaty. Meat on the bone, no fat. There's lots of that all over the internet. That's not what I'm concerned with. I want to be able to help people, get their stuff together, and leave. When I die, I want to leave the place at least 1% better than when I found it. So, depending on what I'm looking at and what I'm requiring, that's my favorite space at the time. When I was up in Scotland, which is one of my favorite parts of the world, I went to the stone circles on the islands of the Outer Hebrides. They're totally intact and they're totally unadulterated by human folly. So they're very clear signals. And I was getting pulled into the stones, and I'd walk away an hour or two later in the middle of the night and I go, well, I can't stop thinking. And I'm writing things down. I thought, this is really good stuff. Where's this coming from? So then I spent 3 years researching it, and it comes out as a book. So yeah, I have to go and do the science to back up the stuff that I'm getting from the management. It's because I can write this so quickly and so easily, and a huge percent of the population would buy it immediately. But that's not what I'm trying to do. I want to get the skeptics on board. Otherwise, I'm not making a difference. I want to get them to see that there is science and hard facts behind all this mumbo jumbo. So one of my favorite places at the moment, and it has been quite some time, is not far from you. It's in the South Island of New Zealand. It's called Tawhiti, and it's the birthplace of the gods. And you have to understand that the people who live there, they're not Maori. And I've had lots of conversations with a lot of Maori people, and they said, we're not the first people here. And I know it's very politically sensitive, but it is politically sensitive because it's all to do with the Waitangi Treaty rights and the money that they want to get from the council. Now, I've spoken to other Maori tribes and they said, no, it's bullshit, because when our ancestors arrived, there were people already living here, and they were really tall, and they were light skinned, and they had red and blonde hair. Where did they come from? Well, those were the gods called the Urukeu, and the Aboriginal people talk about them as well in Australia, under a different name, and I can't remember what they called them, by the way. So they had a place that was called the birthplace of the gods, and I thought, oh, I've got to go there. And it's a natural landscape temple, much like Uluru, except there's a whole hill with monoliths on the edge of it. They're natural, but they've also been shaped by people to represent the gods of the old days. And that's their academy. And I didn't know any of this when I first went there. I just went up there and I thought, I'm feeling really connected here, and I'm picking up information. And I'm seeing animals that were last here 12,000 years ago at the end of the Ice Age, and they're extinct. What? I'm not even on drugs, what the hell's going on here? And it became the foundation of my seventh book. A little did I know that I was even going to be writing about this, but just sitting there under the main stone, which is their tutelary goddess Marotini, I was getting these little downloads, and I thought, wait a minute, if this turns out to be true, the Waitaha and the Urukeu before them are going to basically fill in the pieces of information of this lost civilization during the global flood. And it turns out to be absolutely true. They talked about the exploits of these people going from Easter Island to the birthplace of the gods and then going to Lake Titicaca from New Zealand, where they already had another temple city called Tiwanaku, which is 15,000 years old. And no one knew about this. I had to put the dots together, but based on what the management is feeding me by being at this wonderful portal. So that's been one of my favorite ones for a long time because it's a very gentle place. There's only one road. You're about 3 hour hike from the road. There's a couple of houses. You have to plan on food and where to go to sleep. There's nothing anywhere within 45-minute drive. It's a pain to get to, but that's half the fun. But it's so clear. There's been no warfare there. No one's been killed or anything, and the communication is so clear. So if you're in that part of the world and you can't get to Uluru, and I'm sure other Aboriginal places, because I'm sure there's lots of them, and the Aborigines keep it close to themselves. And after what the Europeans did to them, I don't blame them. I'd keep them close to my chest too. So go to the South Island of New Zealand. It's called Castle Hill, by the way, in English, the location. Terrible name. And I guarantee if you didn't think that you were not able to connect with these places, I guarantee you will when you get there. And then send me a postcard with a big smile.
I love that. One of the questions I've got for you here today is if we could just put obviously ego aside for just 1 second, which is always fun to do, just to ask you the question, like from one brother to another, like what do you see your role as being here on this earth at this time? What is the role that Freddy's playing?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, you're right. It's kind of easy to watch yourself fall into this trap where you think you were someone special in a previous life and you did this, and everybody wants that. I was a king, I was a queen. And I'm sure they were. I don't doubt that. And we've had trillions of lifetimes. The trick is you only remember what you need in this particular time now. I'm beginning to suspect something's going on because, first of all, I was born in Portugal. I should be about 5 feet tall, very dark, with thick eyebrows. I am 6'5". I was blonde and I'm green-eyed. Okay, I do not belong in the country where I was born. And I used to be an avid stamp collector, and the first two stamps I ever collected was of a panorama. So it's two stamps stuck together, forming the front of the Temple of Luxor in Egypt. And for some obscure reason, I've always wanted to go there. I don't know why. And the first time I went there, I remember saying to the people next to me, and I said, "You know what? This looks very familiar, but that's not how I left the place." And my friend, the psychic, says it's all coming back now. As it said, well, I don't want to feel like I'm special, but I believe I was one of the architects of this particular colonnade. She goes, well, you were. That's why you wanted to be an architect when you were growing up. I never told her that. And I actually thought about it for a year. Then I thought, no, I kind of feel like I don't want to be an architect now. I think I've done that. And I was 16 when I had that thought. I didn't have any idea what was going on. So there's something in my genetic memory that brought me back to Egypt as an architect. And I was there during the time of Akhenaten and Tutankhamun. And I am very protective about Tutankhamun. I always have been. I get very angry when people talk about that family in a negative way. I mean, it's almost irrational. I actually start almost beating people up. I don't do that. I'm not a violent person. But I remember being with a guide in the Cairo Museum years ago, and he wouldn't let me talk. And I'm the official guide. And he was talking about Akhenaten this and Akhenaten that and all the other bullshit you hear. I nearly leapt over a glass case and nearly punched him one. And then I realized I don't want to spend the rest of my time in an Egyptian jail. And that's when you realize this guy's got an issue with Akhenaten. I said, don't you ever talk about my family that way ever again. And that's when it finally realized, oh, that's the connection. Yeah, because rationally, there's no explanation. But I am beginning to suspect that, the place where I was born in Portugal, there is an Egyptian connection. The name is a corruption of Luxor in Portuguese. And I've always been a great believer that we are born where we are and have the people around us that we choose to be with as a kind of a mnemonic device to help us remember what we're doing here. So in this case, yeah, I was part of a temple culture So not surprisingly, I'm drawn to a temple culture now. And I saw it being destroyed. So now I'm trying to put it back together again and tell people about the benefits of going to the temple. Or maybe I was part of that destruction. I don't know. It's a work in progress. I have to sit with it and go with it. But I do suspect that part of the fact that I'm very tall and very light skinned and all of that, I'm beginning to suspect that maybe there might be an Anunnaki connection there somewhere, but again, I don't want to go there because I don't want to feel like I'm ever so special or anything. But it does make you wonder because I have met people around the world who are like that, and they're very sincere about it. And they say the same thing. I don't want to feel like I'm ever so special or important. It's just that I've got these memories that I can't explain. And how else would you explain it? Your brain can't make up something unless it's from direct experience, unless, of course, it happens during the dream state. But between 2 and 3 in the morning, as you know, during REM sleep, your soul leaves the body and goes connect with the rest of its soul. There's only about 30% of your soul that incarnates into the body. The rest of it is having a wonderful time in this holographic universe. So that's when you get those really weird dreams of strange people in strange places. Well, your soul can't manufacture that. Your brain can't manufacture that because it has no reference point in the physical world. But your soul can because you're somewhere else. And then the car alarm goes off at 4 in the morning, and woof, you go down through the portal, that magnetic portal, back into your body, and you go, oh, I was having a great time. What the hell was that? That's how it happens. So it's still a work in progress. I'm slowly picking up the pieces of who I am. But I'll tell you a funny thing. I have a terrible thing with going underwater. Even being in the shower, if water falls in front of me, I panic like I've drowned. And anytime anyone is looking at a video of the Titanic, I start throwing things at the television. It's like, do not disturb this grave. And I'm serious. So here I am in Portland, Maine, not far, 5 hours sail from where the Titanic actually went down, near Nova Scotia. And I actually went to Nova Scotia to the graveyard where the victims of the Titanic were put there, trying to find myself there because I think maybe I went down with the Titanic. Maybe my grave is here, but I didn't see it. Now, about 20 years ago, I was dating a girl in England, and her daughter says to me, and again, I don't talk about this to anybody, and she says to me, I remember you being aboard the Titanic when I was a child. I didn't have any parents, and my mother now in this lifetime ran a halfway house where you were in uniform. You came from America and you wanted to go aboard this maiden voyage on the Titanic, and you took me to get to America. And I remember when the ship was hit by the iceberg, that you put me on a lifeboat and you drowned. And I thought, wow, I'd never ever said that to anybody. You can't make this stuff up. So I finally made peace with being underwater now. So that was a good thing. I finally put something to rest. But it does make you wonder, though, doesn't it, about your sole purpose and what you come here to. And I do believe that we do remember these things to fix things or to help you in this particular lifetime. So that's what I've come here to do. I've come here to fix things which need to be addressed. But my other professional side is to try and be a better teacher.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And one of the things that really continues to, I guess, invite itself as a question in this conversation is also around our senses and perception. Because it feels like, as you invited us to go to these sacred places and these portals and these sites, like you mentioned, you've had experiences in the past where you've gone in and you've had some really remarkable things happen to you that have shifted your entire sense of being, and then subsequently your career paths and whatnot as a downwind of that. But the openness, the receptivity, the sense, there's part of me that wants to jump in and start answering the question on your behalf, and maybe I'll just like the technology that sort of pervades our occupation as well, and maybe just the dance between all of that and a true receptivity, and the senses that are required to be able to, not required, but could be helpful in such environments such as the portals to experience.
Oh, I think it's important to visit these places. There was the spiritual head of the Knights Templar said it very well, and he was addressing a bunch of knights, and he said, "You know what? You've got to go and venerate the sacred places. You have to understand the spiritual context of the land." That doesn't sound like someone who's addressing, serial murderers and killers with swords. It sounds like he's addressing people who are looking for a spiritual quest, which is exactly what the Templars were into. So they were looking for those little portals on the land where they would connect with this other level of reality, and they would come back into consciousness, and they would become teachers, priests. I'm talking about Catholic priests. I'm talking about non-denominational, and people who became hermits, and they basically put down their swords, and they became better people. And that was only 8 centuries ago. So it was still going on back then, and it's still going on now. But the idea is this is a personal journey, and I always tell people, you can come on tours and do this, but you've got to do it by yourself. It's an individual journey. No one can really tell you or show you the path. If there's something that I say that makes sense, then put it in your toolbox, but then build that toolbox with your personal experience, because it's those moments alone, even with a standing stone, which is the most boring thing on the planet, and yet it's like, the ancients call them the houses of God. And you look at a stone, you think, no, it doesn't look like a house, but oh, it houses the energy of a creative force. That's what the God they're talking about is. So you can stand next to a large upright rock and you go, oh, I think I'm just going to stand here. And you take an intention there. So I'm not sure what I'm looking for. I'm not bringing you my problems, because if you take your problems, the stone will remember everything. And that's not a good idea. Then people like me have to clean it up. So you just go there and say, I'm trying to be a better person. I'm trying to understand something, and let it go. Give the universe the goalposts, and the management will fill in the details. And then just let it go. Don't expect anything to happen. If you expect it, you'll get it, and it will come from your own ego, because you're so desperate to have the experience. You want to go over to, you want to go and have a Barbie and have a Castlemaine 4X and say, hey, guess what I did this weekend? I talked to some fairies. And it came from your own imagination, from your need to be accepted and for your validation. That's not what this is about. You expect nothing in return, and then you'll be pleasantly surprised. And then be careful what you ask for, because you might get it. The door suddenly opens, and you're going down this rabbit hole of discovery and self-discovery and self-empowerment, because the information that you're getting back is filling in the bits that you forgot that you had. Here's a funny thing, and the Egyptians said this very well. When you incarnate, you're going into a spiritual death. Okay, you've forgotten where you've come from, and then you spend the rest of your waking life watching podcasts, or reading books, or watching Gaia television, or going to lectures to find out what the hell you came here to do. And that again goes back to the portals idea. The thinning of the worlds, or the veil, is to help you remember what the hell you're doing here. And sometimes it comes in the form of a vision, or a sound, or a coincidence, or you walk into a bookstore and a book literally falls out of the shelf. I mean, that happened to me when I was just starting out, and I thought, oh, book just fell out of the shelf. I think I better pick it up and put it back on. Oh, that's interesting. I never would have thought about reading this. I think I'll buy this. Boom, they've got you. And before you know, and I still have it, by the way, that's what got me started. My first book that I fell out of a shelf was on like pyramids. And next thing I know, I've lost my job. So I'm feeling sorry for myself, looking at my navel. And I figured, hell, I'm just going to sit here, have a beer, and read the book on pyramids that fell out of a bookshelf. And I went, hey, I would love to do this for a living. And before you know it, the management goes, and you get another job, and you're miserable, and you got a big paycheck, and then you get fired again for having a conscience, and then you get another book on, out-of-body experiences, and you start putting one and one together, and you realize someone is pulling some strings here. And then when you have experiences, you realize this is true. And I'm going to take a big leap of faith. And that's the moment where you have to cross that bridge. And all of us have to face that challenge one day. As Elton John's lyricist wrote in one of the greatest songs ever, we all have to cross that bridge or we fade away. He's absolutely right on the money on that one, because there's that moment where you realize you've been living a half-life. Okay, you've been living the life that maybe your ego wanted, or your parents wanted, or your peers wanted, but that's not who you are. And you know it because you're just miserable, okay? And yeah, you got lots of money, you got a lovely car, lovely house, but you're still miserable. I had that too. And then I went, no, I want that. That's what I want, because that is special. That is magic. And I feel better about it. I don't understand it, but I feel better. And you take that leap of faith. Yeah, I lost my 14-year marriage, I lost my house, my cats, my cars, my friends. It was very lonely, but you know what? 30 years later, I'm exactly where I wanted to be, and it probably is exactly what I came here to do, because I'm happy doing what I'm doing. It's challenging, it's difficult what I do, it's lonely, but I'm very happy doing it. So that's when you know, when you're connecting to these places that are helping you to remember who you are. You're doing the right thing because there's a certain joy in your life. There's a quickness in your step, and yeah, it's not doesn't mean it's going to be there won't be any challenges. There will be. Life is always full of challenges. That's what makes us who we are. The trick is when you get a challenge and you trip over and you land flat on your face, just don't make a habit of it. Just learn not to do it again the same way, and that's how you become a better person.
How do you discern? Because there's so much around myth, and myth often in common vernacular has this connotation of lie, but it's, we both in this conversation know that that's probably very far from the truth. Oh, look, I did that. That was kind of poetic. But lie, truth, discernment, myth, how do you navigate all the pitfalls, especially in the work that you do, Freddie? How do you navigate your way through?
That's a great question. Yeah, no, I learned it the hard way. I was learning to dowse back in the early days to get a sense of how subtle energy works. And dowsing is one of the oldest professions, by the way. It's second oldest profession to prostitution, it turns out. Not that there's a connection, but yeah, they employed dowsers in computer companies to look at broken cables behind walls, oil companies. They talk about drilling wells in the Gulf of Mexico, but half of the wells are found by a guy sitting not far away from me with a map, making crosses using a pendulum, and he faxes the map over to the oil company, and they go and drill, and there's the deposit of oil. So I was very keen to learn this because it's very useful, and I was getting all of these wonderful results and feeling really good about it. And then I met a real dowser, and they said, Freddie, it's coming from your own head because you want so much to validate your specialness that you're creating the response in the dowsing rod. I said, and be honest about it. I said, all right, I'm going to be honest about it because no one else is listening. I'm going to be honest about it. Yeah, perhaps I wanted it to happen. I said, you don't need to work that hard. Ask exactly what you want to look for and let the universe give you the answer, and you stand back in amazement. I tore up 2 years of work at that moment. Didn't feel too good about it, but you know what? I became a better dowser as a result. So that's how you know. You've got to basically look in the mirror and be honest with yourself. And again, it's that sort of thing where if it comes from the ego, it means that you're going to get an invalid result. You've got to leave that sort of emotion at the door. It's a wonderful word, emotion, energy in motion. If you attach emotion to the outcome, that's coming from your ego. If there's no emotional connection, that's coming from a purer place. It's a place of detachment, okay? You're not expecting a result. You're not attached to the outcome. You're just going to say, whatever. So it's a bit like imagining a sheet of glass in front of you, between you and the rest of the universe. That's how I try to look at it every single day. And I said, okay, I'm not going to sort of expect anything, but this is what I'm looking for. Blah, 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 blah. If it meant to happen, present it. If not, I'm going to have a beer. No big deal. And it's like you step back a little bit outside of yourself and you watch the world around you, almost like you are on drugs, but you're not. In fact, drugs get in the way, people. Don't do it. This is better than drugs. It's real. And you kind of step out of your own body. It's like you're watching yourself, looking at the world, and you're looking at this stuff happening. And you go, oh, that's what happens. Okay. But you're not emotionally involved in it. And that's when you realize that's how you're getting the real result. So it's about taking the emotion away from the whole event and the expectation. If you're expecting something to happen, yeah, you're creating that expectation. So don't do it. So there are these wonderful little devices. And in fact, I actually, the third section of the book actually talks about all of this. I had no plans actually to write another book, and this publisher actually talked me into it. And she says, well, the third section, you could talk about practical things, how people can actually engage with this subtle energy, techniques. And I thought, actually, the time might be good for that. I didn't think about that. Okay, I'll write it. And it literally just wrote itself, that whole section, like in like 3 days. It just came pouring out because I've talked about it for 30 years, but I've never actually written it down. I didn't realize it because it's so automatic. And it was liberating. I thought, oh, expectation, mindfulness, emotion. I thought these are really important things for people. You take it for granted, and yeah, you take it for granted. That's the problem. So it was nice watching all this in black and white and becoming a practical sort of book at the very end. So yeah, there's simple techniques that you can use. In fact, I'll give you one right now. A little trick I play with people, which was played on me originally, so I'm kind of plagiarizing it from my glorious, fearless teacher, and I'm sure she plagiarized it from somebody else. And it is right. She'll look at you when you go into the room, and she goes, "Can you name me 10 sounds you heard in the last 10 minutes?" And I go, "Footsteps, door closing, and that's it." And he goes, "Okay, now I want you to go for a walk." Okay, and 15 minutes, 20 minutes, come back. Okay. And while you're at it, extend your ears and your vision. What? Yeah, extend your hearing and see everything. Okay. And you go outside and you return 15 minutes later, and she goes, "Now tell me 10 sounds you heard in the last 15 minutes." And you can't stop talking because your senses are now so open. You can hear grass moving. You can hear the wheat actually expanding in the midday sun. There's a crow pecking a worm a mile away. I'm exaggerating, of course, but there's a woman putting a washing out. You can become so sensitive to everything, and now you are mindful of your environment. You become psychic essentially, and you develop that again and again, and you interact with these places of power. And not only can you start after practicing for a while, you can start seeing energy coming out of the stones. You can start watching the telluric currents move from A to B, what they call the Jalkiri in Australia, the spirit roads. That's what they are. You can actually see the spirit roads when you work with them long enough. And if you practice this on a daily basis, you basically start seeing people as well and events and start going forward and back in time. That's what being a psychic really is. And we all have this ability. It's not a special ability. We're born with it, but our parents and your friends will talk you out of it. I mean, you remember before you were 7, you were talking to invisible people. I mean, be honest about it. And you saw fairies and things, and you play with invisible friends. Well, yeah, because your soul is still partly in the other world. But then slowly you get whacked on the head, or you get taken by the ear. Don't talk to invisible people. It's not going to be good when you grow up. Yeah, you get conditioned, and you're stuck in the physical, boring world. So if you got one foot in both worlds, well, now you're in control of your own destiny and your manifestation process as well, which means that you're not a slave to either. Okay, one foot in both worlds, you're master of both, and nothing can tell you what to do. That's a pretty good place to be in.
Stepping into back to portals and sacred sites, what is up with Jerusalem? There's an interesting place on the planet there, surrounded by conflict. Like what? Like I just
What
you
is
got
up?
any insight? Do you know what I mean? Like, what's going?
Yeah, it's
Is
called Zionists and extreme right wingers making a real mess and literally committing a genocide. Let's just say it right out. It's a genocide, and it's been going on for too long, and it has to stop. What those people are going through. And the funny thing is, this is a fact, by the way. 70% of Israeli people are against this war and what they've been doing to the Palestinians. 70%. That's a fact. So it's sad. But it goes back again to the pollution of sacred site, Jerusalem, or Ger Isalem, as it was originally called. The place, it literally means the homestead of Isis. That's what it actually means. So this conflict
Really?
between Jews and Arabs, well, Ger Islam is named after an Egyptian priestess who was an Arab. Well, back then, of course, there was no such thing. There were just people who lived locally. So it's kind of ironic, isn't it? It's a bit like a cosmic joke, except people die as a result of it. It's a hotspot. It's one of the biggest portals on the planet, like Stonehenge or the Great Pyramid, or Uluru, another one, Arunachala in the south of India. There are all of these major portals, and it's so old. I mean, just up the road, literally, there's Baalbek. It's one of the oldest megalithic sites on the planet. I mean, they've got stones there, 1,800 tons. There's nothing on earth that can lift that. So, yeah, we knew what was going on a long, long time ago. And so Jerusalem is layer upon layer upon layer of civilization. And sometimes it gets it right if people are doing it for the right reasons. But here's the thing about energy: it doesn't give a damn one way or the other what you think. If you go there with the intention of adding light, it becomes more light. If you go there with the intention of polluting it, it gets polluted and it goes dark. Glastonbury is another great example, just like Jerusalem. I can't tell you how many times I've been to Glastonbury, and I used to live around the corner. And you go there because you've run out of words to put on a piece of paper, so you have to go for a walk. And I think I'm going to stand on Glastonbury, get some energy, and you get there and you think, I can't wait to go home. It's horrible because some idiot's been up there doing black magic or devil worship or whatever, or doing alien abductions. So we get the group together, clean it up, and put it back to neutral, and then let it be what it is. And Jerusalem's very much like that. There's so many layers and so many thousands of years. It's about 10,000 years of habitation, apparently. So sometimes they get it right, and then some idiot comes along, and depending who's in charge, and gets it, puts his will, stamps his intent on the energy, and the energy says, "Okay, I'm going to basically amplify what you put here." So if you put the wrong intention in there, it will just amplify it. It's the same reason why the Nazis were after all of these things, because they kind of understood and didn't really understand the power of ancient places and things like the Ark of the Covenant and stuff like that. They were fascinated by all of this technically New Age stuff, but they didn't know how to handle it because they didn't have the education behind it. So the idea was that they would collect all of these ancient artifacts and use it to take over the world. Well, that's a great example of what's going on in Jerusalem right now. A minority of people are imprinting their will on there, and the site is saying, "Okay, I'm going to manifest it for you," to the detriment of the majority. So, and we can turn this around. Okay, we can turn this around very, very easily, and I hope it will. I really do hope it will, because it has seen much better times in the past. I mean, there was an interesting guy that was there 2,000 years ago called Yeshua ben Yosef. And he tried to, bring some new ideas. And of course, the locals just yawned, believe it or not. They said, Jesus, the changing the water into wine, the resurrection thing. Oh, please. Thousands of people have done that. And in fact, what he was practicing was an old tradition called the Way, or the Way of the Gods, as it was called, that traced back to 8,000 BC in Japan. So nothing new under the sun, but he was bringing back that sort of culture of love and light, love thy neighbor, respect for the land, respect for the sacred space. That's why he kicked the money lenders out of the temple. So he was doing exactly what we're talking about now. And for a little while, he actually succeeded. It was the fact that the extremists, I mean, think about it for us. This is what I don't understand about religion. The Jews actually technically murdered Jesus because they sold him out to the Romans. The Romans didn't want to kill him at all. Isn't that funny? So you read the Gnostic Gospels, which are the ones that were basically kept out of the Bible. It's a completely different story. They said, no, they never nailed Jesus to a cross. They're confusing a spiritual truth with an actual event. Criminals were nailed to crosses, and even the Romans said, we can't nail Jesus to a cross. He hasn't broken any law. And that's another story for another day, because we're going to go down a long rabbit hole. And I'll bring in the work of a great researcher called Michael Bagent, who was a Kiwi, one of my favorite writers. And he actually nailed the true story of what happened around the time of Jesus. But back to the point, Jesus understood what we're talking about because he came from the same tradition of teaching that I've been learning from, that so many of us are learning from, which is essentially this teaching that was brought to us by these groups of gods that appeared out of nowhere after a global flood at certain points around the world to teach us the equipments of civilization. And one of them was how to take control over the laws of nature so you can intercede on your behalf to become a better person. And if you're a better person, the world around you becomes better. And that's how we evolve. So nothing new under the sun, really. It's all plagiarism, really, isn't it?
I'm so glad I asked, and I'm so interested in going down that rabbit hole. But
Yeah,
another
he
podcast.
died.
Another
I
podcast.
almost
Yeah.
got to meet him. He lived in Auckland. He was also one of the 3 writers of Holy Blood, Holy Grail. He wrote a great book, and I will push his book here. It was called The Jesus Papers, and he said the key to the story of Jesus is understanding not just the Gnostic Gospels, which now goes back to the Nag Hammadi texts and Holy Blood, Holy Grail, but the Jesus Papers talks about the one person who's central to the true story of Jesus, Joseph of Arimathea. Once you understand that guy, you've got the whole story figured out. Now, it's a very, very good piece of research. I have to say, I totally recommend it. You may not believe it, but at least the information is there. You can check it out.
The Ark of the Covenant. What is the Ark of the Covenant?
Oh, God. That's another long story.
I know, I'm probably opening up future
There's
podcast
many.
sequels to this podcast.
It's
Is
a bit
probably
of-
what I'm
actually,
doing.
That's kind of a portal in itself, a kind of a portable portal. There's many Arks of the Covenant, and you'll see them on the friezes on the walls of the temples in Egypt. In fact, in every Holy of Holies, there's a picture of the Ark of the Covenant there, and it's like a wooden boat carried by people and there's a little box on top of the boat. And inside the box were the stones which carried the words of a specific god associated with each temple. So that's where the story comes from. The Hebrew story is a little bit distorted because it also comes from an older narrative, but that's okay. So essentially, the Ark, it's still a bit of a mystery. My colleague Graham Hancock, who I'm sure you've heard of, he wrote a lovely book which hardly anyone talks about. In fact, it was one of those books that got me to do what I do because it gave me the confidence to go out and do this, because I figured if he can make a living doing that, so can I. And I told him, it was wonderful. I think it was his second or third book, and he actually followed the trail of the Ark all the way down to Ethiopia through Elephantine, which is an island in the Nile, and he actually found the building where it still lives today. And he actually went in there to try and find it, and he got the hell beaten out of him by one of the priests because no one's allowed in there. They're very protective about it. And the best part is the priests who are protecting the Ark, they know they're going to a certain death. They actually die of what looks like radiation sickness after 7 years. And that doesn't matter because another one will take their place, and they're quite happy to die protecting that thing. So obviously there's some radioactivity involved. And the other story comes from an old Egyptian tradition, which long precedes the Jewish tradition. And it talks about how in the time of Geb, who was like the third pharaoh of Egypt, and I'm now talking about 36,000 years ago, according to the timeline of the Turin Papyrus, which is a little document that none of the academics want to talk about. It's very inconvenient. And so around about 36,000 years ago, Geb looks at Ra, who's one of the first rulers of Egypt, and he says, listen, Dad, you've been on the throne for 800 years. They had incredible long lifespans back then. You've been on the throne for 800 years. There's drool coming out of the side of your mouth. Do you think I could have a go? And eventually Ra gives his throne away to his son. And one of the things that Geb inherited was a cedar box lined with gold, with certain figures. And he's thinking, oh, this looks suspiciously like something I read at Sunday school. And he said, okay, I know what this does, and I'm going to put special gloves on. And even with my gloves, I'm going to stand at the back of the room, and I'm going to tell my guards at the other end of the room, a long, long way away, to open the box. So the story goes that they opened the lid, and it basically electrocuted the guards that opened the box, and Geb got third-degree burns. So when the Israelites had their own version of the box, and again, there's many versions of this box, the Philistines tried to open it, and they all got hemorrhoids. So there's something very self-protective about that box. And I can't remember who was doing the research on this, but it seems that it wasn't the table of laws that were in there. It was the tables of testimony, and also the actual laws of how creation is made and the tree of life itself, which is essentially the foundation of Kabbalah, which is a very Islamic tradition, which is now a Jewish text. So I always wonder why Arabs and Jews are always fighting, because they're fighting about the same thing. Kind of funny, really, isn't it? And tragic. So Kabbalah, or the spirit body of a creator God, that's what it means. It's literally the codes for establishing creation itself, the laws of nature, what essentially makes you into a god. But it could be something else.
I can see why it's so coveted. Oh my goodness, there are so many things that I still want to ask you about, like, what was going on, what, like, Lemuria, there was giants, there was hybrids. But I think for those that are tuning into this podcast, we may have to leave that for another day. I do want to ask, you mentioned it earlier in the podcast, and I just want to close that loop, which was we're in this particular time, we're going from this, some people like the fourth to the fifth stage, from the third, some people call it from the third to the fourth, that Mayan calendar, back to that 30 years ahead, 30 years behind. We're at the midpoint. We've just crossed over. We're 12 years into, so there's potentially another 18 years ahead of us at this midpoint.
Yeah.
What is, I'd just love to empower us as we leave. What's really going on? What's the opportunity that's at hand, in your perspective at this time?
Oh, just like what I said before, we've got to become much more aware of the fact and acknowledge the fact that we're in the middle of huge changes. They're upon us whether we like it or not. I mean, global warming is no joke. It actually is happening. If you come here to the coast of Maine and you talk about the rising sea level by a couple of inches to the fishermen, they just laugh at you. They said, that pier over there, my grandfather built an extra 3 feet of stones on top of the pier in 1928 because the sea level had risen that much by then. Today, the high tide is already on top of the pier. We got serious problems here. And if you go to the extreme ends of the earth, southern New Zealand, for example, the weather's going very crazy down there. And Scotland and anywhere on the north and southern portions of the hemispheres, that's where you're seeing the biggest changes. So they're upon us. We have overpopulation of the planet. Someone was actually monitoring, this is very interesting, they're monitoring how long it takes for humans to consume all the renewables on the planet before the planet has time to renew them. And every year we lose another 2 days. And last time I checked on this was about 8 years ago. By the time we get to something like the 3rd of July, we have already consumed everything that the Earth can replenish in 1 year. That cannot go anywhere but down. So we have to be aware of all of these problems. We have to acknowledge the fact that we are part of the problem. And we're also in the middle of a huge cycle, a warming cycle, which has been going on since the end of the Ice Age anyway. We're just making it worse by cutting down the trees. And then having, cars that 120 years after the car was built, we still have engines that only get 25 miles per gallon. I mean, it's ridiculous. So if we make conscious changes and put pressure on people who to change, it will happen. And I think that's the biggest challenge. Putting our money where our mouth is. For example, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine the other day that, I drive a 20-year-old Mini Cooper, and I'm totally addicted to it. And, I love it. It's the most fun you'll ever have in a car. I said, why don't you get something practical for the winter? I said, I've never had a problem with a car. It just depends how you drive it. You can get out of the snow quite easily. And the fact is, I get an average of 34 miles to the gallon. And if I really am easy on the petrol, I'll get 36, which is not bad. I could drive a Golf GTI, where I love the GTIs. They get 38 to the gallon. Everybody else is driving Subarus, and they're very proud of their Subarus. Oh, it's a winter car. Yeah, you're getting 22 miles per gallon. And SUVs, you're getting 18 miles to the gallon. It's like, and you're talking about saving the forest, and you want to eat tofu and do yoga. Yeah, but you're driving an SUV, and you don't need it. I had 4 people in a Golf GTI once, and they were very comfortable. We don't need all that space. So we got to make conscious decisions about what we do every single day. And the more people get into the habit of doing, the better the change becomes. So we are running out of time. The window is closing. But here's a funny thing, and this was written down thousands of years ago as well, that if we don't do it voluntarily, the planet and the universe will manufacture events of more chaos to kill more people, to wake up to the fact that, hey, changes are upon you. There was something very poetic about big catastrophes, by the way. And this requires also removing your emotion from what I'm about to say, because we've all chosen to be here. We've all incarnated for a reason. Many of us don't realize what we're doing, and that's okay. But personally, I like to know what I'm doing here because I want to live my life aware. But we came here to do something and perform a certain function, which means that you've already premeditated what you've come here to do. Now, when something horrible happens, like a tsunami kills 36,000 people in Indonesia, as it did 20 years ago, that was actually already worked out. You've actually chosen to be a victim. Think about that for a second. I'm going to incarnate, and when I'm 24, I'm going to be wiped out by a tsunami, while I was cleaning a beach or making some wonderful bread by a shop with some palm trees, because I wanted to be part of that collective experience that will show the world how close we all actually are. By which I mean that when we heard about the terrible loss of life, millions of people around the world donated clothing, food, money to help the people rebuild their lives. Governments promised billions. Hardly one penny made it to Indonesia, and what little got there went in the pockets of the government. So you and I actually contributed to people who we never met on the opposite side of the world to get their life back together again. So it demonstrates we're actually much closer than we think we are. And sometimes these events have to demonstrate the fact that we are at the mercy of nature, which brings us back to what a God is all about. If you're in control of the laws of nature and you can hear nature, you can hear what she's saying, and you can say, oh, I'm going to adapt. Any Native American or any Aboriginal person will understand what I'm saying, because they also went through hard times, but they got through it because they said, hey, it's going to be a very cold winter this year, and it's only March, because they understand the buds in the trees or the way that the animals are behaving. And they said, okay, maybe we shouldn't hang around here much longer. We should move south. So now you're prepared. And the ones that stayed behind died. And that's the whole point. Sometimes bad things happen to get you to wake up to what's really going on and take charge of the situation. So, yeah, that's what humans do very well. We take it up to the last minute. So I hope we kind of leave a bit more time this time so I can go and enjoy myself, But I guarantee you, if that comet does come and we don't get our shit together, I'm going to go to find out where it's going to hit, and I'm going to sit on some deserted island somewhere in the Pacific, eating champagne and sushi, and being vaporized before the thing hits the Earth, and I don't care. That's Plan B in case we don't get that 1%.
Of our intent in line. So if we don't want to see Freddy incinerated, please, please. I was going to say, please get your intents in order. But also,
because this is in Australia and everybody understands humor and sarcasm.
Oh yes, we love it. We love a good laugh, and we can definitely take a joke. Yeah, we can take a joke here. I've noticed a few comedians actually. I've gone to see some stand up recently, and they come here and they feel very refreshed because it's less politically landminey, let's say, than other places around the world. So,
exactly.
Yeah, but
like I miss Barry Humphries like mad, because he was big in Britain when I lived there. Oh, I miss Dame Edna Everage and taking the piss out of Mel Gibson.
Could you imagine George Carlin being alive right now?
Oh, George Carlin, genius.
Beyond intelligent. The transmission.
Yeah, we have Jon Stewart now. Yeah. Thank God he's back.
So, some really incredible.
I'm for Jon Stewart. I want him as president. Not only will you get facts, you have a good laugh as well.
Guys, there's a book available called Portals. We've touched on it lightly here today. Like you said, there are some interesting chapters in there as well that would take you into places that otherwise wouldn't go. And I think it's very very intriguing that there is a bit of a revelation waiting for us at the end of the book as well. Knowing how much of your life gets poured into the work that you do. It is just, Freddy, how do I... Obviously, I'll put a link to the book in the show notes below. I will put a link to your YouTube channel, which I'm a man. Okay, the asterisk and the warning for the YouTube channel is you can't. It's like those chips. You can't just have one. Once you start digesting one, you start. 5 videos later, you're like, whoa,
there are 16 documentaries and other books.
Yeah, there's a lot in your ecosystem, and that to sort of say, I will put links in the show notes and the description below. But also just taking the opportunity to thank you.
Thanks, Amrit.
Not just for your work, for your time, your abundance, and the energy with which you're sharing it here today, But man, just your sensibilities, to tune into your senses, to tune in, to be open, to follow your path. You mentioned the bridge. That sharing really is going to stay with me here today. The bridge that you mentioned from that incredible lyricist. There's so much
Danny
that
Taupin, one
you
of my
committed
heroes.
to. Yeah, you committed to your path and found your way and continue to find your way and putting all the jigsaw. I see you as this epic jigsaw puzzler, but it's such a treat to have you here and just revel in the
I want
insights.
to be a stamp collector. I never realized you're going to be stamps on my passport. I just wish they made the legroom a bit bigger in economy because I want to pay first class. It costs me a bloody fortune to fly anywhere and do this stuff nowadays.
The seats are getting smaller.
To do a tour of Australia. We talked about this at the beginning. I always end up in New Zealand because I love it there. I really do. And I'm still hoping that I'll still be able to move there. But everybody texts me and emails on Facebook and says, look, you're just around the corner. Get on a plane and come to Sydney or Brisbane or Melbourne. I thought,
Melbourne.
I've really got to plan this sometime, maybe next year. So I'm putting the feelers out now. And, we'll have a good time.
Yeah, like I said, if you ever do foray into Melbourne, the Inspired Evolution's always here to support you in any way that we can.
You're right.
And thank you so much, Freddy, for just being you, carrying the torch, doing the work, and sharing yourself so abundantly here. I have put, like I said, description, show notes, check out all the links. Highly recommend. I'll put some of the other books in there as well. Some of the hidden stuff is really interesting as well. Without too much further ado, if it's okay, I look forward to having more conversations with you in the future, Freddy. Thank you again.
Well, thanks, Amrit.
Inspired soul, thank you so much for watching it through to the end of another episode. Now, as always, the invitation to please hit subscribe. Your subscription powers and empowers everything that this channel is up to. Thank you so much for all of you that have hit subscribed. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please take a moment to do so. At the moment, 80% of the people watching this channel haven't yet subscribed. So only a fifth of the people that actually love this channel are a representation of the audience. If we can get that number higher, the episodes and everything will continue to grow and everything just happens easier and more fluidly and is just, like I said, powered and empowered by your subscription around here. And that's you powering the channel. So thank you so much for your love and subscription. On screen now, if you loved this conversation with Freddy, are another couple of conversations. Robert Edward Grant, trips to ancient sites, man, he is the guy. So there's a really yummy conversation for you on screen with Robert Edward Grant here. Another conversation with Dr. Konstantin Korotkov. He is the guy that measures intention at sacred sites and energies. Really profound conversation on screen for you right now with that as well. And just as always, opportunities for you to stay inspired, to continue to evolve. Subscribe to the channel and click on one of the videos so I can see you in the next one. Stay inspired, keep evolving. See you there.